Guys, this is going to be an infuriating article. I guarantee you it will be. And I feel the title alone gets across just how infuriating it's going to be. It's an op-ed from a Newsweek writer called J.K. Rowling Might Have Just Won the Culture War. I just felt the cringe tingle up my spine as well. I felt it too. Don't worry, it's not just you. That was everyone. It is an unlikely return, reminiscent of Harry Potter, the boy who lived himself. I feel like I have to write this in the voice of like a turf wine mom. It is an unlikely return, reminiscent of Harry Potter, the boy who lived himself. Or the Dark Lord Voldemort, depending on your opinion. Okay, maybe they're not. Maybe they're not taking sides so hard. I won't do the bit the entire time. Let's just read this normally. J.K. Rowling, author of the globally adored fantasy series, who in recent years became a pariah in some quarters over her views on transgender people, appears to have just won the culture war she has been fighting for the past 5 years. There's a lot to unpack here. Now, to start off, if you're someone who is made uncomfortable by or has a problem with trans people because you're like, they make you uncomfortable, or you think they're like dangerous, or you just think they're weird or different, then get over yourself. Like, seriously, why the fuck do you care? Like, that is fundamentally the argument at the end of the day that needs to be had. Why do you care? Prove that there is some overwhelming harm that is categorically taking place. Not little anecdotal stories or videos or whatever. That's not data. That is not proof. That's just a narrative. And all these people that push against trans rights just believe in a narrative. That's all it is. Since 2019, Rowling has sparked impassioned debate and backlash over her statements on trans women and insistence on using male pronouns to describe them. The British-born writer has publicly supported women who question legitimacy of trans women's gender identities and has dedicated much of her feed on X, formerly Twitter, to speaking out on the issue. And in doing so, mind you, she is also allied with several neo-Nazi figures in the UK. There's quite a lot of crossover with like the UK neo-Nazi community and the UK TERF community, so there's obviously been a lot of crossover with the people who she's collaborated with. What's so unfortunate about all of this is that a very nuanced social and scientific issue has been essentialized and then turned into not a civil rights debate about a group of real breathing people who deserve rights and respect, but into a culture war debate. Something that people farm revenue and clicks off of, not something that people are genuinely looking at, for the most part, as a important civil rights issue, an issue that should be taken as seriously as any civil rights issue should be taken, right? The fact is that the social and scientific nuances to this topic are actually quite deep and do require a bit of explaining, and so the default position for a lot of people leans a lot closer to transphobia than even being completely neutral on trans people and having no opinion on them. I think that you got to recognize that for a lot of especially Americans, and I guess British people too, they don't know the distinction between like a trans person, a flamboyant feminine gay person, a cross-dresser. They don't know the differences in these things. They don't have the education or the vocabulary to get it. Many of them might even mean well, but they use terms like transsexual or transvestite because they're kind of behind the times in their progressivism. Like, they watched Rocky Horror Picture Show and they're like, yeah, I'm woke, I'm with it, you know? So I think it's important that we recognize how so many people can default to agreeing with J.K. Rowling. The left has a tendency to assume that because we're right and we are fighting for justice, in the end, we're guaranteed to win. And to an extent, I do feel that in my heart of hearts. But at the same time, that's not just a reality that's going to happen no matter what we do. We have to make that happen. And in order to do so, we have a lot of educating to do. Just a lot of fucking educating. On so many fronts. In schools, in pop culture, in news media, in every front possible. On the personal level as well. We have so much educating to do. To break down the issue as concisely as I possibly can, the overwhelming majority, and I mean overwhelming majority, there is a consensus, as they call it, of agreement among scientists, sociologists, and just the big smart lab coat-wearing nerds that specialize in these fields, that there is a thing that is real and exists that is called gender dysphoria. Don't mistake it with body dysmorphia, by the way. That is a different thing that should not be treated the same way that gender dysphoria should be. I think a lot of people also don't have the education or vocabulary to understand the difference between body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria. And the importance of that distinction is blatant when you understand that no medical professional would advise that you feed into the delusion of body dysmorphia. But gender dysphoria is not a delusion, and it's not considered feeding into a delusion. And so when you mistake those two things, it's easy to consider gender dysphoria like a type of body dysmorphia, a delusion about your body and what you really look like and what you should be, that's being fed into unhealthily by whoever supports trans rights. People lack that fundamental education, and that obviously kind of leans them more towards the transphobic default. Now, the overwhelming majority of scientists and all those big lab coat nerds I talked about earlier that specialize in these fields agree that gender dysphoria is a separate and real thing. Symptoms of gender dysphoria include some things that a lot of transphobes like to tout as epic owns on trans people, such as very high rates of depression, very high rates of suicidal attempts and ideation, the whole 41% stat, like being socially isolated, a lot of bullying, feeling distant and unaccepted by society. These are all symptoms that a lot of transphobes use to try and say, see how being trans is harmful? When in reality, all of the medical data and scientific consensus shows that if you have someone who's gender dysphoric, meaning they feel internally that their gender identity does not align with the one they were assigned at birth, this could mean they're non-binary, it could mean that they are binary, that they're like binary trans, it could mean they're gender fluid, which means that they don't really have an attachment to the concept of gender, and they're not necessarily like they don't have a gender. They're just like, call me whatever the fuck you want. I don't care. At least that's how most gender fluid people I've met feel. And while these may sound like newfangled, weird, trendy things, and don't get me wrong, I think inevitably, statistically, there are some Tumblr teens out there that pretend to be trans for fitting into certain left-wing communities online or to feel special in some way. I don't think that extends very far or goes anywhere, because the reality of being trans is very tough, and no one will endure that for the sake of attention. Not generally. You gotta be pretty fucked to be willing to do that. So, there are people who have, though. Ollie London, for instance, is a really good example. That, the person who, stalked Jimin from BTS and was, trans Korean or whatever, and then detransitioned, quote-unquote, and is now a right-wing grifter, saying that he is battling against the pro-trans movement because they told him that he was valid as a trans Korean. Meanwhile, every trans person on the internet was, making fun of him. Yeah. He was just a plastic surgery addict who wanted attention for stalking a really popular celebrity, and now he's grifting for easy bucks off of trans hate. Because of people's default to feel uncomfortable around trans people, and let's be real, I'm going to get a little politically incorrect here. A lot of normie cis people become uncomfortable, not when they see some bombshell, hyper-passing trans person, but when they see someone who's maybe not too far along the journey. You'll notice that a lot of transphobic depictions of trans people, particularly trans women, that are unflattering, and they always are unflattering, tend to be like an obvious, like, okay, this person's clearly not very far in their transition, I see, right? Because the transphobes recognize that to get normal people into that state of mind where they feel grossed out and they feel afraid, or they want to other someone, you have to evoke a feeling of disgust or grossness or weirdness or like a feeling that like this is something abnormal, right? And for a lot of people, if they see someone who looks unconventional in any way, it doesn't even have to be anything to do with gender, they're just unconventional in their presentation, it might push them away. People judge books by their covers. And so it's sad to see that you've got all these scientists and doctors recommending that if someone is gender dysphoric, validate their identity. If you've got even like a 10-year-old assigned boy at birth who says they're a girl and wants to go by she, her pronouns and be called Sally, do those things. If they grow out of it, then fine, they grow out of it. But do those things just in case, because the data shows that it has overwhelmingly positive outcomes when you validate the identity of trans people. Those suicide rates, they drop. The depression rates, they drop. In some cases, all it takes to drop these rates by a factor of 80% is one single friend or family member acting as a support line that validates their identity. One parent, one uncle, one friend at school is all it takes to see a nearly 80% drop in depression and suicidal ideation in gender dysphoric, particularly youth. And gender dysphoria is real in youth. I get that some of you might have, I don't know, been a kid once, and maybe you identified as a dinosaur. You want to be a fire truck when you grow up. I get it, okay? Gender dysphoria is a real thing. It is. The big lab coat people have figured that out, like over a decades ago at this point. They know it's real. They can identify it. They can parse it from what's not it. They can notice the red herrings at a very high rate. And if they don't, thank God we have hormone blockers, a fully reversible puberty delaying process that for a young teen who is trans and dysphoric and doesn't want to go through the wrong puberty, they can delay puberty, allow it to onset later if they end up not being trans in the end, which they probably wouldn't at that point, but, you know, better safe than sorry. But they can just go on the correct hormones they want to if they end up being 17 or 18 years old and they're like, yeah, all right, time for the hormones. I think a lot of people lack some of these really critical points. If I could like project myself onto the moon talking about this issue, and I had 10 minutes to do so, those would be the points that I would touch on. Because at the very least, those fundamental facts, those ideas, would be exposed to every person on the planet. And even if everyone doesn't believe it, at least a bunch of people might look into it and find out all that is true. Even if they don't believe it, maybe they'll look into it. And if they look into it, chances are they find out all that is true. And that's what matters. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And I'm not surprised that J.K. Rowling is starting to see a lot more public support. Celebrities have condemned J.K. Rowling's statements, including the entire cast of Harry Potter. Social media users labeled her views disgusting, and activists branded her a TERF, a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. I like that using the term activist is a dirty word. Conversely, she also received an outpouring of support for her stance, with the hashtag #IStandWithJKRowling trending intermittently on social media whenever the debate resurfaced. Now, long after J.K. Rowling had accepted she might have irreparably tarnished her legacy, she finds herself firmly back in the fold. Warner Bros. Discovery, the entertainment behemoth bringing her Harry Potter franchise back to screens as an HBO TV show, stated in November that not only will it be working with her on the project, it sees no reason to wade into the furor over her trans-related utterances. I mean, obviously, of course, trans acceptance is nowhere near as, widespread as, gay acceptance. Had she been screaming about how these F-slurs need to stay out of our public spaces, she would be blacklisted from every bit of Hollywood. But trans people are not given as much respect as gay people, women, racial minorities. They're not considered a protected group in the same way yet. We're trying to achieve that. We're trying to educate people to that point, but there's a lot of work to do. It's going to take a lot of work. HBO chairman and CEO Casey Bloys said at a November 12th press event that Rowling was very, very involved in the process selecting the writer and director, and adding that Rowling's trans statements, quote, haven't affected the casting or hiring of writers or production staffs for the show whatsoever. Damn, dude. I think this really goes to show that, especially post-Trump's win, a lot of Hollywood, the corporate space, they're kind of going by the go woke, go broke mantra. They're starting to shill, or really disregard, I should say, the concerns of progressives and, like, activist groups, and starting to say, fuck it, we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to work with whoever we want. Cancel culture truly is dead, guys. They've done it. They've killed cancel culture. We did it, guys. No one can be held accountable for their bad behavior. This won't end poorly for any of us, guys. This is what winning looks like. The apocalypse will be met with thunderous applause. Anyway, everyone, if you enjoyed this segment, if you found it entertaining, enjoyable, educational, please consider leaving a like and a comment. Thumbs up and comments are completely free, and they are the best way to support my channel, as they get my videos in front of new viewers constantly. It actually forces YouTube to do so. So I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who hits those buttons. And of course, hit subscribe and ring the bell icon if you haven't already, if you want YouTube to tell you when I go live or upload new videos in the future, because if you don't, they won't, I promise. And of course, if you want to see more from me on other platforms, consider following my social medias, linked down below in the description, including my Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, fan Discord, Blue Sky, all that good stuff. I hope to see you around there. And of course, finally, if you want to support me directly, financially, and help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head here at the Xander Hall studio, then please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or perhaps even support me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buying some merch. The Streamlabs link down below. Regardless of how you support me, though, thank you so much for watching the stream. Or not the stream, the video. We're not ending stream. And as always, have a good one.